The story is that he simply read the manifest on the train and changed the route of the train. He was on his way to wherever, someplace, and he literally changed the train and went to Dessau and kind of crashed the party. My name is Ariel Aloni. I'm a grandson of Arieh Sharon. I'm the elder son of his elder daughter. My mother's name was Ariel Aloni, and I grew up in Israel. I live in New York City for the last 30-something years. And from my mother and grandmother, I also have a Swiss aspect to my life. And that's about it.
My name is Anja Guttenberger, and this is my podcast, Bauhaus Faces. Welcome to a new episode of Bauhaus Faces. This time I talk to Ariel Aloni. He is a grandson of even two Bauhaus students, the architect Arieh Sharon, probably the most famous Israeli architect, and the Bauhaus weaver Gunta Stölzl, the only woman who was successful in becoming a Bauhaus master. Ariel's mother Yael was the first child of Sharon and Stölzl and one of the original Bauhaus babies who were born and partly raised there. After World War II, when Yael was in her 20s, she decided to move away from Switzerland to Israel to live and work with her father, later also with one of her half-brothers, Eldar, in their architectural office in Tel Aviv. It exists even today and is now run by Eldar's son and Ariel's cousin, Arieh Sharon. As Ariel says, quote, "There was no conversation with Sharon without the Bauhaus popping up." And that is also true to his architecture. In his buildings in Israel and Nigeria, Sharon still refers to what he had learned from Meyer and Wittwer at the Bauhaus, and then elevated the concept by adapting to the climatic conditions that were very different from Northern Europe. In Nigeria, he went even further and added also architectural aspects of the local Yoruba tribe. After a career of nearly 60 years as an architect, Arieh Sharon left roughly 800 buildings and is today known as the father of Israeli architecture and is one of the consequent pursuers of Tropical Modernism. He is less known, however, for his work as a construction site manager for the ADGB Trade Union School in Bernau near Berlin, Germany, but we will get to that project too. There is no Israeli architecture prize that Sharon did not win. And even today, everyone in Israel still knows who Arieh Sharon is. It is time we get to know him as well.
I want to start that I knew Sharon very well. I was lucky enough to know him as an adult. So he passed when I was around 25 years old. So I had the opportunity, especially in the last 10 years of his life, when I was like a teenager growing up, to meet with him literally hundreds of times. So he was born in Poland, in a small town called Yaroslav in what is generally known as Galicia, and has a lot of jokes in the Jewish culture about this area, specifically in Poland. He was a Zionist at his heart, in the sense that European Jewry were Zionist. They spoke Hebrew there. He has a lot of friends from that town. And then when he was, I think, a teenager or so, he went in high school. He also studied a little bit of engineering, which is in a town called Bernau, which I'm probably not pronouncing right, in the Czech Republic. But there was a well-known technical school there. It has some tie to the future. And then he actually went to Israel and became Arieh Sharon very early of his life. That's an important aspect, I think, in terms of the personalities involved, because he was born Ludwig Kurzmann, and when he was 20, he formally changed his name with the British authorities. There's a bunch of papers on the topic, to Arieh Sharon. And then when he founded the kibbutz in Israel, so I'll skip forward. In around 26 or 27, he decided to go to Germany to study. He didn't know where. He was actually headed, I think, to Bernau. At least that's the legend that I hear, because that's where he studied for a year or two before that engineering, and it was something that he liked to do. And He arrived at the Bauhaus, I think, at the end of 26 or definitely 27, he was there. And it was, the story is that he simply read the manifest on the train and changed the route of the train. He was on his way to wherever, someplace, and he literally changed the train and went to Dessau and kind of crashed the party. He was accepted. By far, his mentor throughout also his lifetime was Hannes Meyer. He was known for helping Hannes Meyer do the ADGB and many other buildings. The anecdotes are that he was accepted kind of directly into he convinced Gropius or before Hannes Meyer, to accept him to like a short route at the Bauhaus because he built a lot of buildings without any education in the kibbutz in Israel, which is true. I think and he did the focus mostly with Albers, who had a great influence on his life, and also the families are connected to this day. Ditto with the Schlemmers. There was a special relationship with the Schlemmers, especially from Gunta. Gunta and Oscar and Tut were very good friends. So there is a context of Bauhaus all the time around Arieh Sharon. Since then, I think it has had a huge influence on his life, not only on his work. You cannot have a conversation with Arieh Sharon without the Bauhaus popping up somehow, let's say.
Let me add a project of Arieh Sharon right here. As Ariel has already mentioned, Arieh Sharon had built a few houses in his kibbutz in Israel before he studied at the Bauhaus. I find it important to tell you that he became interested in architecture in a quite unusual way. He worked as a beekeeper and was fascinated by the way the bees build their honeycombs. That's how his interest in architecture was piqued. In order to become a, quote, proper architect, his kibbutz sent him to Germany to study architecture. When Sharon came to the Bauhaus in 1926, Walter Gropius, the founder and first director of the school, accepted Sharon right away because of his previous knowledge. Sharon would first visit the so-called Vorkurs, in English that's preliminary course, which was obligatory to every Bauhaus student. After that, he became part of the newly founded architectural class that was headed by Hannes Meyer, a Swiss architect who brought his architectural partner Hans Wittwer with him. In 1928, Sharon went on a trip to Moscow to visit the Wuchtemas Academy with other Bauhaus students, among them Gunta Stölzl, who had become Bauhaus master of the weaving workshop in 1926 when the Bauhaus moved from Weimar to Dessau. The story goes that on this trip Sharon and Stölzl fell in love with each other, and in 1929, roughly a year later, their daughter Yael was born. She would be crawling underneath benches and looms when her mother taught at the Bauhaus. Once Gropius had left the Bauhaus in March of 1928, Hannes Meyer became his successor and Hans Wittwer followed in the footsteps of Meyer and became head of the architecture department at the Bauhaus. Wittwer then revolutionized the students' views and beliefs and opened a very new path into architecture. His main focus was on carrying out preliminary research and calculations about the way of the sun and shadows, about the characteristics of the building plot, and about the future inhabitants' needs and their frequent ways in the building. All of that was, to Wittwer's mind, the basis of creating architectural plans for a building. This understanding can be best seen in the design of the ADGB Trade Union School in Bernau near Berlin, a school for adult voluntary trade unionists who were invited to come and stay for 2 to 3 weeks at the school and be trained in the practical fields of unionism. ADGB stands for Allgemeiner Deutscher Gewerkschaftsbund, which is in English General German Federation of Trade Unions. That's why Ariel refers to the school as ADGB in our podcast, which is German for ADGB. The design of the school is mostly known as realized by Hannes Meyer. However, recent research has shown that this is not entirely true. Hans Wittwer played a major role in the observations and calculations that Bauhaus students executed and subsequently translated into diagrams that were a main part of the competition entry. The trade union school is designed to accommodate 120 persons at the same time in bedrooms for 2. A recreation and entrance building is linked to the dormitory pavilions and the school wing by a long glass passageway. The whole building can thus be grasped in a short moment. Additionally, Meyer and Wittwer thought up an intuitive color-coded system. Each dormitory house has its own color, blue, green, red or yellow, which can be found at the entries and on the walls and floors of each house. The windows of the dormitories all look east into a small pine wood and onto a small pond and a swimming pool that was part of the educational recreational concept of the school. The gymnasium has a large glass facade with foldable elements to extend the space for sports. Next to the school are small terraced houses that belong to the school staff and their families. All of the buildings are flooded with natural light, equipped with super modern window opening systems and clever architectural highlights. Although it was only in its original existence for 3 years as a trade unionist school, in May of 1933 the Nazis occupied the building until the end of World War II, it was restored in 2002 until 2007, and is now a UNESCO World Heritage of Modern Architecture. Arieh Sharon was the construction site manager of this ambitious project. When Wittwer decided to leave the Bauhaus and the Bernau project to become head of architecture at the Burg Giebichenstein Art School in Halle, Sharon went with him as his assistant. However, shortly after, Hannes Meyer offered Sharon the position of the head of his Berlin office that was installed solely for the project of Bernau. An offer Sharon could not refuse. He went back to Berlin and Bernau and finished the ADGB Trade Union School in 1930 as Meyer's right hand. In 1931, Sharon returned to British Mandate for Palestine for good. Gunta Stölzl and their daughter Yael also left the Bauhaus and settled in Switzerland. Sharon's and Stölzl's relationship remains until today somewhat discreet. As the two visited their daughter in Switzerland and Israel respectively and also saw each other on Bauhaus-related events, they too kept in touch. There was no bad blood between them until they died, only 1 year apart.
My mother was born in Berlin in 1929. Her birth name is Ariel Sharon. She was given a Hebrew name, and Sharon's last name, going back to his changing of the name, about less than a decade earlier, was formal. So she was born Ariel Sharon, and she stayed Ariel Sharon until she was formally adopted 15 years later by Gunta's second husband. And then she stayed Yael with her first name in Hebrew, but she was also had a Swiss name, Gabriela. Like her friends from high school would call her Gabi. So she had kind of very unusual, let's say, changing of names and kind of identity. I think my mother considered herself Swiss until the day she passed in Israel, in terms of her core personality, as it manifests itself in the language, let's say. I think, I don't know, we always joke about couples, you don't try to understand other people's relationship. If you are lucky, you understand yours. I'm not going into that, what happened exactly between them, because it's futile. But what makes me a little bit, happy is that, in the last 20, 30 years of their lives, there was a real connection. Right, my mother Gunta visited Israel a bunch of times. Sharon and Gunta met for many occasions in the Bauhaus context, exhibitions in 64 and 77 or 76. And they both died a year apart, which is also, there's some irony there. You asked me the tough question, so I'll get to it last. Why did Sharon leave? We'll never know exactly, right? We know the facts. Sharon went to then mandatory Palestine in the summer of 31 and stayed in Israel, in the time mandatory Palestine, and became the state of Israel after that. That's just what happened. They were formally divorced in 36 or 37, and that's about it in terms of the formalities. In terms of the events, Sharon visited my mother in Zurich. It's documented around 36, 37, probably around the divorce. I'm not sure. The war was very rough on everybody, obviously, some more, some less. So I don't think, I know they didn't see each other during the war. And then there's an anecdote which might be a nice one for this podcast, so I'll tell it right now. where Sharon was visiting. My mom went to Geneva to study languages. She was already, so now we are in like 47, 48, so she's like 18, 19, with her best friend Effie. And there were like 19-year-old girls in Geneva in the dorms, and Sharon was visiting. Geneva. A little bit of context: an Israeli architect visiting Geneva in 48. That's like, you know, the sun is shining from the west. It's very unusual. Sharon was exceptionally well connected already then, and he did some projects with the UN. So and he visited Geneva, and my mother tells the story in the following way: that Effie and her stood by the window in Geneva dorms and looked at the people coming down the street, trying to identify who her father is, because she wasn't sure exactly how he would look like. And since then, she actually knew the father. Of course, I don't know if they recognized him, but he visited. And she somehow reconnected with her father. She then studied in Switzerland and went to work there. And in Israel, actually, when she went to visit Israel in, I would say, 53 or 54, she was on her way to America. So, and she decided to stay before she met my father. I always joke that my mother is the only real Zionist in the family, in the sense that she made the decision of staying there. So, and then she spent the vast majority of her life, of her adult life, in Israel. And there was always this duality with the grandfather in Israel, and we went to Switzerland in the summers, most of the summers, to see Gunta. And so there was always this duality, you know, with the kind of almost two. In my internal family, this duality of two families, right? There's a family in Israel where we speak Hebrew, and we have, like I said, like another, who knows at the time, a bunch of cousins. And the visits to Switzerland, where there's an aunt, and later she had kids. And then everything changes to German. And they spoke to us German and Swiss German. So there's this kind of duality of the way I grew up with a person like Sharon in the background. So his friends until his old age his closest friends were Bauhaus people. I would mention one name, Naftali Avnon. He had a different name when he grew up, which I forgot, of course. Rubinstein, exactly. And he was a close friend in a household. Like when you go to my grandfather's home in Israel, the odds that Naf is not going to be there are very low. In between, Sharon had he was extremely or exceptionally productive in terms of the number of projects. There was a big exhibition in Israel. I'm closing the loop from the other side by at the time, the Dean of Architecture at the Tel Aviv University, who was a friend of mine. He was the curator. There was a debate. He said that he thinks there's more than 800 projects. I would say at least 600 or 700 or so are documented in the website. It's a very large amount of productivity for over 40, 50 years. He's considered by many the architect of Israel. That was the title of the exhibition 5 years ago or 6 years ago. The Israeli national plan is literally named after him in the local jargon of architecture. It's called the Sharon Plan.
When the State of Israel was created in 1948, one of the main tasks was to create accommodations for the waves of immigrants that came from Europe. Arieh Sharon became head of the newly set up government planning department and was directly responsible to the Prime Minister's office under David Ben-Gurion. The team consisted of 180 architects, urban planners, and economists. The National Outline Plan that was initiated by Sharon and his team divided the country into different planning regions. In each region, a medium-sized town would become the regional urban center. This is what is called the Sharon Plan. In 1953, Sharon was invited by the UN to consult as a planning expert in a seminar on housing and community improvement in India, Burma, and Japan. Between 1948 and 1964, Arieh Sharon also worked in a joint architectural office with Benjamin Edelson in Tel Aviv. Edelson had immigrated from Europe to then British Mandate for Palestine, later Israel, in 1925. The architects became great partners and lifelong friends. In 1964, Arieh Sharon's son Elder became part of his architectural office. They worked together on several projects until Sharon's death in 1984. The most beautiful and fascinating project is probably the University of Ile-Ife in Nigeria. Elder's way of building, of course, differs from that of his father.
But when Sharon was 75 years old, a whole bunch of people, and I would give credit to my mother big time on this one because she's like the operator, right? She did all the publications for Sharon, and she was also a driving force behind the next one that I'm going to talk about, which is amazing. And they had about 100 people talk about influence, write like a one-pager about Sharon, or to be more precise, those architects, they can all draw perspectives in their sleeps. There is an anniversary book, handwritten book, which is on the website for the 75th anniversary of Sharon, which is easy. It's the year is 75 because he was born on the century, right? The result is a book with 100 people, roughly speaking, writing things, including everybody who worked with him, really on the professional side, like who worked with Sharon. I don't think there is a single Israeli prize who was not represented in the book. Most of the people, it was also his office. Again, I'm talking from secondhand knowledge. I'm not an architect, and I wasn't there. Certainly, I was a baby. But a lot of people who were very prominent architects later, I would say a lot of them, spent some time in Sharon's office and had to say something about it and wrote things. And I think it's an amazing book because a lot of them are also painters or they have special hands, and some of the works, they are really phenomenal and they are one of a kind by definition. That's it. They did one page, they binded it, and that's it. However, the reason I'm saying that is because Edelson's wife was still alive. Edel died in the 60s, so it's like 20 years after Edelson died. And his nickname was Edel. They all use the quasi-German jargon between themselves. And everybody was drawing beautiful picture. And Edel's wife wrote one sentence on a whole page. She said, Edel always said in Hebrew, so I'm translating loosely. Edel always said, I love Sharon, and I say the same thing, and signed. That's it. So here we go about relationships. For me, it's all very personal. I know those people, like, I spent all my childhood with those people. Elder was very charismatic, very charismatic. My uncle was considered the rebel, right? The brutalist rebel who he was a huge fan of Frank Lloyd Wright, so they started to use the 60 and 30 degrees in a whole bunch of places. But again, I want to qualify my statements, and again, for the second time here on this podcast, that I'm really not an architect. I'm an architecture buff. I will step on a plane to see a Zaha Hadid 5,000 miles away, but I understand it from the outside. In the what versus how, I'm pretty good at the what. I'm very weak at the how. So I think the professional relationship, especially with the son, were complicated. However, with all the jokes aside, it did work very well, right? They built hundreds of buildings together, hundreds of projects. Some of them were very well known, Now, if you look at the building in those 20 years that they worked together, I think it's 25-ish, whatever, something like that. Early 60s to mid 80s. And all this time, my mother is working in the office as well, most of the time, right? So the elder daughter and the elder son are working with Sharon in his office in his last 20 years. So that's kind of the personal setup around it. And I'm like a teenager. I'm in that place 2-3 times a week. When you look at the buildings, I'll tell you what Eran said when he did the exhibition. Not I did. When he did the exhibition about Sharon in 2018, in the family there's this thing. This is Elder's building. This is Sharon. Who was more dominant at that moment? And Eran said, I see Sharon everywhere, meaning he sees Sharon's influence in every building. It doesn't matter whose name is on top of it, which I translated to he sees the Bauhaus everywhere. But Elder was considered a rebel, right, in the Israeli culture. Also, he never got the Israeli prize. He was very vocal in his opinions and stuff like that. He was also very good friends with a lot of people, a lot. So in terms of architecture, I like Elder's architecture a lot. I think I can see some differences from his father. I think the form follows function is still hugely present and everywhere, despite some critics. And I think he left a mark. It's not a question of famous, but they stand out in the buildings in Israeli history that Elder did, both on his own or to be more precise, before that he collaborated with two other pretty well-known architects. One of them is Hecker, which became famous in Germany, and their teacher. And then with Sharon, I see like an Elder thing there, going kind of on his own and then working with his father. In 2018, there was a big retrospective exhibition about Sharon and his life, his professional life, par excellence. Gunta was also mentioned there. We sent things from New York. And like I said, the curator, he's now the Dean of Arts in Tel Aviv. He was then the Dean of Architecture. It was all under the umbrella of the Tel Aviv Museum, which is, depending on who you ask in Israel, but at least in my opinion, is the most important museum in Israel. And they dedicated the whole building to it, and the whole thing was really a wonderful thing. And they did those interviews with people who used to work with him. There was one lady architect there that was interviewed. She was, and my mom was still alive, and everybody knows each other, And her name doesn't matter, but she was an architect in Sharon's office. She was interviewed, by the curator, as were many other people who worked with him. And there was videos spread around the exhibition. So you could sit and watch, people talking about him as you see fit. And I'll never forget, they asked her, tell us about Sharon, what kind of connections he had in Israel, because he was considered very well connected, blah, blah, blah. And she looks straight at the camera and goes, you don't understand, huh? It's not Sharon's connections. Sharon was the connection. So I thought I don't know exactly how he reached his statue, but he literally people came to him to solve quote unquote problems. So I know there's a kind of almost a mafia metaphor behind it, but that's how people talk in general, right? I'm not sure how he reached that status, but I know there was a lot of hard work involved. I know that the Bauhaus mantras of less is more, and who were expressed by Ms., in my opinion, the best way. Less is more, and God is in the detail were huge mantras in his life. And the ultimate Bauhaus mantra, right, the form follows function, was always there. I think it just worked, and I know that, for example, in the 30s and 40s, where it was very hard to make a living in general, he just planned 50 kibbutzim. I'm not sure if he was paid. And in the war, they had an office, but I think he went to teach in the Technion in Haifa because there was not enough work. And this is a good time to mention his partner throughout his professional career, Edelson, who was an amazing person. I never met him. He died relatively young, but he was Sharon partners for many years. He's also an Israel Prize winner. It was his buddy, by far the closest person to him professionally. They built a whole bunch of hospitals together and a whole bunch of other things. And he took over the office while Sharon did the Sharon plan, for example. And then they built another thing. So it's a very important person in Sharon's professional life.
And do you know what Arieh Sharon's favorite project was?
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind at all, but that's very Beilinson for sure. The hospital, the second version of the Beilinson project from the 60s, that was his project. That was it. He always said that, personally to me and to many other people.
What was so special about it?
There was a first version in the 30s. It's in a town called Petach Tikva, near it. It's like the Metro Tel Aviv area. Today it's called the Rabin Center of Medicine or something like that. But everything in Israel is now called Rabin, rightly so. And just for historical reference, so you know what to look. But it was very well known as Beilinson for many years. I was born there, for example, literally in that hospital. There was an early version in the 30s, what is sometimes known as Beilinson 1, and Beilinson 2 is a late 50s, 60s thing. When I say I was born there, 58, it was already there. And it's very hard to tell, but there was the whole Bauhaus, for example, how to build windows and lights and how the function of the light, it's all implemented almost like magically in Beilinson. Those huge blinds. Imagine a hospital in the Middle East in the 50s operating in almost any aspect of medicine without air conditioning. How is that? People, births, everything. There's this whole gigantic system of blinds and what to do in the afternoon and how to make the whole thing cool, which comes from the Bauhaus. You can see it in his focus work, literally speaking. There is work how he calculates, how windows are bringing in the light in certain hours of the day, and of course the lighting in Israeli sun is different than the European sun. So you need to adapt, and then you go to the Arabs and the Bedouins. What do they do in the tents? They have a whole system of how to cool their tents, which is basically based on pressures. So he studied all those things, and I think the most telling picture from Beilinson, at least for me personally, there's two big pictures, two photographs that I like. Which are both on the website. One is Sharon walking in the Beilinson gardens, which were beautiful. On his own, I would say mid-60s, after the project is complete. Complete, I mean, maybe late 50s, I'm not sure. Everything is documented on the website. That's why websites are for, right? To document. And the second one is all those blinds and all those that were meant for the hospital are thousands of them, before they put them in place, to protect the windows and corridors and whatever, are on the lawn in front of the hospital as they were brought with trucks in. So you can see, physically, think of it as, when I say blinds, like in America, the things that you cover windows with, I'm not sure this is American word. But imagine those huge blinds protecting the windows and the corridors and allow winds and windows to come in. You can see parallels to ADGB. In my mind, the windows there, the windows in ADGB are very well known. You can see Bauhaus, in my view, in almost everything he did, Sharon, like literally speaking. That's what I feel. The university in Ife is basically the culmination of Sharon's deep entrenchment in the Israeli establishment. It's deep. It's the collaboration at the time with the Nigerian government was at the government level. The Israeli government and the Nigerian government collaborated, and there was exchange of exhibitions. Nigeria is a nation, the biggest nation in Africa by a long stretch. I don't know, today it's like the sizes, right, are gigantic. And it was Nigeria, we are not going to get into politics here, at least not too much, only as they affect our conversation, was before the big mess, let's say. It was still relatively safe to go, and the atrocities that happened there were it's part of the story, in the background of the story. But the connection is Israel government and Nigerian government, and that's also formally the way it went. The name of the company is Ami something, which is the two entities that ran it were Nigerian and Israeli. And the Israeli entity that ran the project on behalf of the Israeli government is part of the old establishment of the Labour Party, 100%. It was done by Solel Boneh, which was like the building department of the Labour Party. Israel in the 50s and 60s was structured in, let's say, socialist-style government, for lack of a better term. And Sharon was part of that establishment. Right? He literally built most of their public buildings in Israel, right? The house of the socialist this party and the house of that, and they are all related to the Israeli establishment at the time. Not all, but a lot. And the university 100%, but legally and financially, the state of Israel and the state of Nigeria collaborated. The personal side, which is always there with Sharon, that they became friends with that vice chancellor of Ile-Ife, and they were literally good friends. And the whole project was, 15 years duration. It's huge. It's gigantic. I know that they started to go in the early 60s, and to Nigeria, like everybody flew to Nigeria, right? So Sharon was in Nigeria, I don't know, a lot. And a whole crew of architects was stationed there. And Elder, of course, went there a million times, and my mother went there, and everybody went to Nigeria, and those in the 60s and 70s. And every time there was another, it's a big campus. And I forgot they changed the name because they named it after some Nigerian personality now. And I've never been there. I'm dying to go. I know it was abandoned for, because of the political mess in Nigeria, it was abandoned for like almost 2 decades. And I think they started to resurrect it like the jungle went in. It's literally in the middle of the jungles. And then around 20 years ago, I'm guessing from memory, it kind of came back and they started to put more attention to it. And today it's many people, when they write about it, they say the most beautiful campus in Africa. I've heard that term many times.
It's their slogan.
The slogan, you see? Okay,
yeah, it really is their slogan, the most beautiful campus in Africa.
There was a nice movie made on the topic, part of the 100th anniversary thing. And I can tell you that in the last 5 years or so, since the 100th anniversary specifically, where it was a huge part of the Imaginista and the curators of the Imaginista, whom I met, both of them, were, although they were from other arts world, they were deep into that. The whole project in Nigeria, Imaginista was the 100th anniversary celebration on the digital side, right? That's the logo they chose for the audience who doesn't know the name Imaginista. So, but Ile-Ife is one of my favorite projects, no doubt, in Nigeria, no doubt.
Founded in 1948 as University College of Ibadan, the University of Ife, established by the government of then Western region of Nigeria, was not established until 1961-62. It was founded 2 years after the independence of Nigeria as the first university of the country. Ile-Ife is the holy city of the Yoruba, a West African tribe. The university became a post-colonial project between traditions and modernism. The campus was built between 1963 and 1979. Back then, Israel supported African countries with their knowledge and technologies. The university consists of several buildings, not all of them by Arieh and Ariel Sharon, but the most beautiful ones are. The Sharon's architectural design blended the features of the international style with the traditional architecture of the Yoruba's royal palaces with their open courtyards. There are the inverted pyramid buildings that provide shade and at the same time protection from rain. The ground floor is kept open so the wind can move through freely and create shadowy, cool areas in the heat. Its architecture was adapted to the tropical weather with high humidity, glistening sun and monsoon rains. Arieh Sharon had brought along all of his knowledge from the Bauhaus. Remember Hans Wittwer's principle of conducting research about the location, the sun, the needs of the people? And from his time as an architect for the State of Israel, where he already became part of the Tropical Modernism movement. Tropical Modernism is a movement from the mid-20th century. It merged modernist principles with vernacular traditions and adapted to the distinct climate and cultural context of a non-European country. Culturally, it is marked by post-war modernization and decolonization. The heritage identities became more important and a new appropriate form of architecture that stood out from the buildings of the European colonists had to be found. Of course, traditional architecture that already offered solutions for the specific weather and ground conditions, all too often disregarded by colonial architecture, moved into the focus and reevaluated tropical modernist buildings by far. The Brazilian architect Oscar Niemeyer is one of the best-known representatives of tropical modernism. The Bauhaus Imaginista project that Ariel is talking about was primarily initiated and financed by the Bauhaus Corporation, that is the Klassik Stiftung Weimar, Bauhaus Archive Berlin and Bauhaus Dessau Foundation. The curators of Bauhaus Imaginista, Marion von Osten and Grant Watson, both came from the post-colonial and contemporary studies and awarded the project a fresh view of the Bauhaus. They uncovered links to the Bauhaus all over the world, from the more obvious parts like Russia to the less obvious ones like Japan, India and Nigeria. The buildings in Ile-Ife by Arieh and Ariel Sharon quickly became their heart project. It is their merit that the focus has shifted to the decaying buildings of the university campus in Nigeria and their immeasurable cultural worth. Obafemi Awolowo University, as it is called now, has since then achieved to have a recovery plan drawn up for one of the Sharon buildings by the Berlin architects Brenner that are specialized in reconstructing Bauhaus buildings like the Bauhaus and Masters Houses in Dessau, the ADGB Trade Union School in Bernau and the Max Liebling House in Tel Aviv. Now the search for funds to put the plan into action has started. The online journal created in the context of Bauhaus Imaginista, Bauhaus-Imaginista.org, is an online platform with several articles about the project's insights by internationally renowned researchers. You can download every article in German and English for free. I will link you the website in the show notes.
This thought process, which, a little bit of, some of it at least is my ignorance about it, right? It's kind of the obvious when you state it after the fact. But the attention to detail for adapting the building, not only to the local, geography, which is what we see all right. I think it's another misline, right? Architecture is what's between the buildings. So you adapt the buildings or the complexes to the geographical size and to the function, of course. But this weather aspect, I think, of adapting the building to the local weather, I think goes across his work all the way, because the weather in Israel is like a little bit different than northern Germany. So, the building materials that are available, well, how do you build a building in Tel Aviv so it won't sink in the sand 20 years later or whatever the thing is? But the weather, and the way it came out in Nigeria, in Ile-Ife, was the inverted pyramids, of course. So I don't think it's an inverted pyramid style thinking is, they probably did it 5,000 years ago, somebody. But the fact that you take a very large project and you make it like a theme with dozens of buildings who have an inverted pyramid look and feel, right? because that's the right thing to do in the jungle, because it's raining most of the time. Not a lot of people did it. So, actually implemented it. So I think this is the ultimate form follows function, is kind of an extreme version of form follows function manifests itself in Ile Ife, where I don't think there's one building where there might be one or two who has, a straight wall. They all have angles. So, and everything is related to the weather in the jungle. If you look at the book, you will see it's backed by statistics to the wazoo. You have the power of two governments, right? The rain patterns over the year, what happens in the summer. There's this whole planning around the weather. And it's the jungle, it's the real jungle. It's, it's below the Sahara, as Africa called, right? That's it. This is the jungle, that's it. And it's deep in Nigeria. It's not near, right? It's a kind of, you need to drive from a big city a few hours to get there. I've never been. Nigeria is huge, right? It's gigantic, both in people and in size. So yes, I see the Bauhaus everywhere. I really see that. So I had many conversations with my granddad. Really, I used to visit him it was kind of this thing, right? I used to visit him, there was a whole, the way the house was structured, his home office, he had a whole floor in his Mediterranean villa there, and the beautiful, the house is still within the family. And a beautiful veranda there, overlooking the Mediterranean. And I used to go up there and then chat about life and everything. I'm a teenager / soldier. And of course, the interpersonal relationship are always there. He's always asking. This is the time I started photographing. Seriously, I had a camera since I was literally 11 years old. But this is the time, I went to New York, I bought a camera, I had a real camera finally. I was in my early 20s. I just spent 17 months outside the country. I shot a few films. So I go to visit him, he's 81, 82, and I show him some pictures about, I'm very proud. I have a few lenses. It's an old Canon. I have it still here, of course. And I show him pictures, and he starts to scream at me, but scream from the top of his lungs. Details. Where are the details? You should shoot details. I'm we called him Lushek internally. Lushek, what's going on? What are you talking about? Because you got to shoot the details of the building, shoot the doors, shoot the windows, shoot the ledges, shoot everything. He gave me a 2-minute, yelling thing, and it worked. I don't stop shooting details from then, all the time, yesterday. So here I go. And I also created a website with my mother before she passed about 2 years ago. And as a tribute to Arieh Sharon, ariehsharon.org. And I keep maintaining it, and I do all those things straight from the heart. It's a non-profit website that is open to everybody. And that's kind of here we close the loop 100 years later.
If you want to know more about Arieh Sharon's life and his work, go and visit Ariel Aloni's website, ariehsharon.org, which I will link in the show notes. There's also a small exhibition called Arieh Sharon from the Bauhaus into the World at one of the original teachers' houses of the ADGB Trade Union School in Bernau near Berlin. The photographer John Molitor shows here in his images the logical continuation of Sharon's architecture that started in Bernau in 1928 to 1930, then had its peak in the White City of Tel Aviv in Israel and at Ile Ife University in Nigeria. You can find all the necessary information on the website of the association Baudenkmal Bundesschule Bernau that presents the exhibition until 31st of October 2024 in their own rooms. I'll too link their website in the show notes. Last but not least, many thanks to Ariel Aloni for his memories and knowledge about his grandfather Arieh Sharon. And please don't forget to rate Bauhaus Faces wherever you are listening to the podcast, preferably on Spotify, and to recommend it to fellow Bauhaus fans and researchers or to friends. And join me on Instagram at Bauhaus Faces and on my website, bauhausfaces.com. And now there's nothing left to say but tune in to the next episode of Bauhaus Faces.